Okay, we're just going to talk about NLP language patterns first of all to get you in the understanding of how we delete, how we distort, and how we generalize information. Just to get you in the psychology of language, how we delete, and examples of such delete, distortions, and generalizing of information. Okay, so in a nutshell, we have this, which is an external event that happens, and we actually assume what is the internal representation of the person that has caused the external event. We actually assume what that person or the ideology or the event has come up with. So then we have these filters that actually are things that delete, distort, and generalize information, and that's according to our meta programs, which we'll cover that in later on. Our values, our beliefs, our decisions, and our memories. Now, the decisions are based on experiences that we have as a result. Now, let me give you an example. So let's say a husband comes home from work early to surprise his wife, and to his mind he's thinking, great, I'll meet my wife and we'll have pleasant dinner and we'll have a lovely evening together. Now what happens is the wife comes home and she is angry, and she basically says to him, other than not say hello, rather than saying hello to him, she says to him, "Why do you always throw your clothes on the floor? It really winds me up." And he's basically now changed his emotion. Now instead of I love you, this, that, and the other, I'm come home to spend more time with you, he thinks to himself that she despises me. And then he basically goes and responds with, "This is why I don't come home from work early. You're like living with Hitler." And that starts off her representation. Obviously that's a real red sign. You do not say things like that, but instead have a look at her perception on why she's communicated what she's communicated. What is the underlying factor here? Now on the surface these are the words that's spoken. Now on the deep structure behind those words is what's in the red and the blue. So she then says, "I just want us to have a great night in and sit for dinner earlier for a change," because she's had enough. By the time they sit down to eat, she's tired. That's the deep structure that goes on. And his deep structure was initially that I come home early, which has now changed to she despises me. Okay. Now let's look at the psychology of language here. Now the language has two forms, as I quickly mentioned earlier. Is a surface structure and a deep structure. Now, how we interpret the surface structure creates a meaning in our minds. Communicating the intention bridges our deep structure. Our intention, communicate our intention. My intention is to do this. How do you feel about that? And that's basically making a bridge to from the deep structure to the surface structure. Okay. Now, does language we use affect the way we achieve our results? And let me put you out your misery there, for it's a resounding yes for me. Because if I introduce you to modal operators, there's certain types of language that we say to ourselves, that we speak to ourselves about. 1, I would like to. 2, I could be, I could do. 3, I may do, be, or like. 4, I shall, be, do, like, to. 5, I need to, be, do, have. 6, I have to. 7, I must, be, do, have. Now, how does that change the outcome, or your behavior towards the outcome? It's a lot actually. So if I put it into a visual term here, our representations are like this. So when we have should have, it's way out there. Wish is way out there. Could is quite out there. May is out there. Now if you notice what's right in front of you day in day out is the need to, must and have to. And that's just one particular language scope. You can have different language scopes according to your upbringing. Some people are better representing themselves in a different language, the language that they grew up in, rather than English. If English is not your first language, or even if English is your second language, some people prefer the second language rather than the first. It just depends on what it is. Okay, so that's just a way of language. Quick pointer here. Now let's go back to the deep surface structures and the surface structures. Okay, now let's talk about surface and deep structure. Now, John, if someone comes up to you to say John is a nice guy, the first thing you should think of is that's the surface structure. I don't know who John is, and I don't know whether he's a nice guy. But someone's ideology, if someone came up to you in everyday life and said, John is a nice guy, you just accept it. So you've accepted that as a surface structure. Now the more deep structure would be to analyze this sentence, to say, okay, so who's John? Does John mean nice guy? I mean, what do you mean by nice? Now, what do you mean by guy? That's other things as well. Because in some languages or some beliefs, guy, the symbol guy actually means someone who's down and out. Is a nice down and outer or traveller and what have you. There's some varying degrees of the word guy according to different cultures, different beliefs. Okay. So now we have these patterns. Let's go into deletion pattern, for example. Now, deletion pattern is, for example, nobody listens to me. The question here would be, who hasn't been listening to you? It can't be nobody listens to you, because then I wouldn't be listening to you by asking, the question back to you, say who hasn't been listening to you. So it's not nobody, it's your idea of nobody. Now, these distortions, deletions and generalizations were taken from cognitive behavior therapy. So they're from the 10 cognitive distortions, which I'll go into later on when we discover meta models and what have you. Okay, so what is missing? What is the missing information here? How do we extract this information? And what is the language structure that presupposes missing information? The missing information is who has not been listening to you, and why do you feel so negative about it? We can always discuss this in class. That's not a problem. That's why the video's on here, and for you to discuss in class. Distortion patterns is, for example, someone saying leasing an animal is torture. How does leasing an animal mean it is torture? Do you lease an animal? For example, in some parts, some people lease an animal and it is for torture. So you want to know about some information with regards to the cause and effect. Some people lease horses, and they look after these horses and what have you. So it all depends on the actual cause and effect of what's going on. So what is the cause of my leasing an animal, and is it going to cause torture? No. Some people it might be yes. Now, what meanings are created here? Now, this basically means that someone has obviously witnessed an animal in torture while it's being leased, so therefore they disagree with it. So you want to get into the deep structure of what this surface structure has come up with. It's almost like looking into a river and where water flows, and on the surface it seems quite calm, And then when you go in the water, that you realize the undercurrent is so strong that it would take you away. Now see it as that, as a visual for deep structure and surface structure, and you might get a better idea. Now what else can these meanings have? That's the other thing that you must look at as well. Now generalization patterns are that all men are scum, for example, someone's come up with. Now, has there been a man who has not been scum? That's the first question to ask. When in therapy, when in carrying out linguistics, that is the first question you would ask someone who says it's an all or nothing generalization. So all men are scum. Has there been a man who has not been scum? And if the answer is yes, often it's the father or something, then you say, really, all men are not really scum, are they? Let's say some men are scum. So it changes. And how does this create the loss of possible experiences? That's what, I mean, these are the questions that you want to sort of ask them. How you are losing out on experiences, and how you are being limited to your fullness of experience due to this generalization. Okay, now I hope that was good. And any questions, feel free to ask me during class. Have a good night. Take care. Goodbye.